Hello, this is Michel via Tensorbet and you are watching a new episode of Wojennik TV. The Napoleonic Wars is one of the topics that interests me the most. I have read several books about this period. I am a big fan of Napoleon, of the Imperial Guard, of all the major campaigns that Napoleon fought during his reign over France. And when in 2009 or 2010 I learned that GMT Games placed on their P500 list a title covering this era, I was instantly interested. I pre-ordered the game and in 2010 I received this big box with Commands and Colors Napoleonics. Now, GMT Games doesn't publish a lot of games set in the Napoleonic era. GMT Games rather publishes games set in World War II, some in World War I, during the American Civil War, but the Napoleonic Wars is not a topic very often used in GMT Games titles. So in some way, this series, because Commands and Colors Napoleonics is a series of games, is fulfilling this gap. Now, as I said earlier, pre-ordered the game instantly when it appeared on the P500 list, and so today I will be presenting you this 10-year-old first edition of Commands and Colors Napoleonics. 10 years ago, I can't even think how this time quickly passes. The game is for 2 players, aged 10 or higher, but it's possible to play it also with younger players. It is, as you might expect, set in the Napoleonic era, and it will enable us to recreate battles fought during the Napoleonic Wars. The core game, which I will be presenting today, concentrates on the rivalry between Britain and France, because in this box you will find a French army, a British army, and also a Portuguese army, which will enable you to recreate a lot of battles fought in the Iberian Peninsula during the Napoleonic Wars. But not only, because you'll get also, for instance, the possibility to recreate the Battle of Quatre Bras or Waterloo. The game is a younger brother of an ancient game set in using the same system, Commands and Colors Ancients. So this is a new version of this system by Richard Borg, which will transport us to the Napoleonic era. Fortunately, it was not only done by copying the elements of Commands and Colors Ancients and pasting it in a new era, it was remastered. It has some new additional elements which really try to recreate the way that the battles, the wars were fought during the early 19th century. So today I will show you the game and then I will give you my thoughts about this title and my final recommendation. So let's take a closer look at Commands and Colors Napoleonics. Here are all the elements of Commands and Colors Napoleonics, the core game. Now I have this edition from the beginning because I ordered it in the P500 system when it was first announced. When I read the information that GMT Games were to publish a game in the Commands and Colors system set in the Napoleonics era, I instantly knew that this was an auto-buy for me, and I ordered it when it was possible. So I received my P500 copy a couple of years ago. So this is the first edition, which differentiates a little bit from the later ones, because there are some subtle differences. The first one is the most obvious. Well, it's the box cover, which is different in the oldest edition and the newer ones. And additionally, on the blocks, we do not have some additional symbols which tell us that, for instance, we have a light infantry in front of us or a heavy cavalry unit. I believe that also the mounted board, which you can see right now, is a little bit more sturdy than it was in the case of the first edition. Well, if it's not, I would say that this thing should require an upgrade, because in my edition this board, although mounted, is quite thick and it is prone to get damaged. Now the board game, the playing area which will be used in Commands and Colors Napoleonics battles is composed of two elements. The first one is the game board, as you can see. This is a mounted board, a very simplistic board, because it is just a map board covered with hexes, with big hexes, as you can see, but nothing apart from the information Commands and Colors Napoleonics is printed on this board. So no terrain feature, absolutely nothing. It's a green board. The only important, very important thing that we receive on this board are those dotted lines, which are used to indicate that this is the limit between sectors, because in Commands and Colors Napoleonics we will be having three different sectors which will be separated by those dotted lines. The first one will be the right sector, which will be to your right. The second one will be the central sector, and finally your left flank, the left sector. And all those sectors, as you can see, are separated one from another. This is important because in Commands and Colors Napoleonics we will be giving orders to units, and in order to activate a unit, for instance, which is on our right flank, we'll be needing a card which enables us to activate something on our right flank, etc. Now, this doesn't mean that the playing area will be dull and it will be empty, because this playing area will be covered with terrain tiles. We receive a lot of terrain tiles in this core game, and they are double-sided, representing different terrain features, which will be used on different occasions. For instance, hills or woods, or some rivers, some windmills, or some rocky terrain, forests, etc. And now, what tiles you need will depend on the battle, because in Commands and Colors Napoleonics we receive a huge amount of battles. Those battles are described in the scenario booklet, in which in the case of each battle, we will be having the information governing the way that the battle should be set, the playing area should be set. As you can see, in each battle you will receive a graphic representation of the initial setup with the different terrain tiles needed to be placed on the map board, and with the information what type of units and what number of those units should be placed on the board. Additionally, each scenario will describe the historical background of the battle, and also some special rules governing victory conditions, or some other things that will work a little bit differently than in the core rules. Now, what I lack in this edition, I do not know if it was changed later or not, is that you do not receive the information about how many different terrain tiles do you need to prepare the battlefield. I know that on the website Commands and Colors Net, I believe, each battle is being represented both by this graphical explanation, and also by a list underneath of the number and type of different terrain tiles needed to construct the battlefield. And it is much easier to browse through all your terrain tiles, grab the ones that you need, and then place them on the map board. Not a big thing, but it is something that would be nice also in this printed version of the game. Now, apart from those terrain tiles which will create the battlefield and which will influence the way that units move, or the way that units defend or attack different terrain types, we will be using blocks. And again, we receive a huge amount of blocks in this edition of three different colors. The blue ones will be the French forces, the red ones will be the British forces, and finally the brown blocks will be the Portuguese forces. But in some scenarios, those brown blocks will also be used to represent other nations, other minor nations, for instance, Brunswick or Hanover forces in the Waterloo battle. Now, we receive three sizes, those blocks are of three different sizes. The small blocks are used to represent infantry. The bigger square ones will be used to represent cavalry, and finally the biggest will be used to represent artillery as well as leaders, because we will get also leader blocks. Now, before playing your first game, you will have to sort those blocks and to apply the stickers, because those are wooden blocks with stickers applied to those blocks. Now, some people prefer to apply those stickers only on one side of the block and then putting the blocks in such a way. The reason is that by doing so, they get another set of stickers which they can apply to another set of blocks if they happen to have any. But I didn't use this method. I applied the stickers to both sides so that those blocks can be put upright, and I prefer this way because in my opinion it is much prettier. Now, those blocks, as I mentioned earlier, are of different types, and among those types, so for instance among cavalry units, you also receive different types of units. You get heavy cavalry, you get light infantry, you get light cavalry, you get guard cavalry, or for instance cuirassier units. The same applies to infantry. You can receive line infantry, light infantry, the old guard, the young guard, some rifle units, etc. So the diversity of units is quite big in this edition, and with all the additional expansions available, those unit types are even more diversified. Apart from those elements, you will also be using cards, because as I mentioned earlier, Commands and Colors Napoleonics will be a game in which cards will be used to activate your units, and you receive a big deck of cards from which both players will be drawing their hands, and those cards are of two different types. The easy ones are the cards on which we just have the information on which part of the battlefield you can activate a certain number of units. For instance, here you can activate 2 units on your left and on your right flanks. Or you can, for instance, get the opportunity to activate a number of units equal to your command, which is always equal to the number of cards held in your hand, including this one played. Or you can get, for instance, 3 units in your center sector, etc. The second type of cards are those which are more complex, which, for instance, enable you to attack before your opponent. Some others will increase your movement ability or your firepower during battle. So it is important to know those cards and when to use them, because it is all part of the strategy. Now, how a turn of Commands and Colors Napoleonics looks like. Well, the main purpose of the game is to gather a number of banners, because in the game we receive also those banner counters, which are used in order to track victory points, and each battle, each scenario will tell you exactly how many banners do you have to gather in order to win the game. Now, those banners are gained in 2 or 3 different ways. The basic one, the most obvious one, is eliminating enemy units. When a unit is completely destroyed, which happens at the moment when it loses its last block, in this game you cannot merge units. So if a unit takes losses, it is reduced up until the game's end or until the moment it is eliminated. If it is eliminated, so when it takes another hit and it has to lose a block and it is its last block, the opponent gains a banner. The second way to get those banners is to eliminate an enemy leader. Now, when a leader is attached to a unit, if this unit loses at least 1 block, it is possible that the leader will be killed in combat. The same applies if the leader was also accompanying a unit which was totally destroyed. The probability of killing such a leader will be even higher. If you manage to kill an enemy leader, or capture it, you gain 1 banner. In some scenarios, you can also receive points by taking control of some objectives. For instance, in the Waterloo battle, the French have the opportunity to get additional points when controlling the 3 objectives. So, for instance, by taking the Hougoumont objective held by the English at the game's start. How a turn of commands and colors looks like? Well, each player will receive a specific number of cards, which is not always the same in a battle for both sides. Sometimes one side can have, for instance, 6 cards and the second 5, which in some way is a way to simulate the quality of leadership or some other factors which influence the real battle fought in the 19th century. Among those cards, you have to choose one of those cards during your turn and you have to play this card. As mentioned earlier, those cards will enable you to activate a certain number of units. So for instance, by playing probe left flank, I will be able to activate 2 units on my left flank. If a unit is placed on a hex which is crossed by the dotted line, I will be able to activate such a unit both by playing a left as well as a center card. So placing units on such hexes is a very good idea because it enables you to activate them very easily. But if I do not have such an opportunity, I will have to concentrate only on the units on the left side of the battlefield. Now, the first thing during an activation is to move your units. So you can move your units and then you can launch attacks. Moving units is extremely simple because infantry units will get the possibility to move up to 1 hex and battle, which means both melee battle and shooting at your opponent. Light infantry can move up to 2 hexes, but then they cannot battle. They can move, of course, 1 hex just like standard infantry and still battle. Cavalry will move up to 2 hexes when it comes to heavy cavalry, and then they can battle in melee combat. Light cavalry can move even up to 3 hexes and then launch an attack, so participate in melee combat. After moving each of your units, you will declare your attacks. Now, those attacks can be resolved in any order that you wish. There is no combined combat in the way that if you even have 2 units which want to attack the same unit, you cannot combine them into one attack. You have to resolve the combats one at a time. If you attack an infantry unit with cavalry unit, this infantry unit can decide to form a square. And this is why among the components used in Commands and Colors Napoleonics, we are also using the square small board on which, as you can see, we have 4 places for 4 squares because this is the maximum possible. So if one of our infantry units is being attacked by cavalry, we can decide to form a square. If we do, we grab the token, we put it on the unit forming the square, and we randomly place one of the cards held in our hand on this board. Now, this reduces the number of cards that we have, but it also enables us to fight the enemy cavalry with an infantry forming square. The advantage is that an infantry forming a square will always battle first against charging cavalry, and it will also reduce the number of dice rolled by the opponent in battle to only 1. I said rolling dice because in Commands and Colors Napoleonics, battles are resolved using combat dice, and you receive 8 of those dice. They are 6-sided dice, as you can see, plastic ones with stickers also applied to those dice. On those dice we have 2 infantry symbols, 1 artillery symbol, 1 cavalry symbol, and 2 special symbols, which are the sabers and the flag. Now, battles are extremely easy because Basically, you just count the number of blocks that you have in your attacking unit, you grab the same number of dice and you apply some modifiers. Those modifiers can depend on, for instance, the quality of the unit. If this is a guard unit or if it is a heavy cavalry unit, you'll probably receive one additional dice in melee. If it is a British infantry or a light infantry shooting at your opponent, which is possible at a distance of up to 2 hexes, you will also probably receive one additional die. If your infantry unit moved during this phase and wants to fire, its firepower will be reduced by half. So for instance, this unit composed of 3 blocks, after moving when it wants to shoot, would be throwing only one and a half dice. Rounded up, in the case of French and British forces, this would give us 2 dice. Additional factors are, for instance, terrain features. So attacking units on hills will probably reduce again the number of dice rolled. Sometimes it is also possible to reduce the number of dice to 0, which means that the attack cannot be resolved. But if you do have any dice left, for instance here, this cavalry attacking this infantry unit would roll 3 dice. Basically it would be 4, but I would be attacking uphill, which means that I would be rolling only 3 dice. I roll those dice and I verify the results. In order to score a hit in melee combat, I have to roll or the symbol of the attacked unit or a sabers symbol. In the case of a ranged attack, I would have to roll only the unit symbol. Sabers won't hit at a distance at a ranged attack. For each hit, I remove one of the enemy blocks. If I roll a flag, the enemy has to retreat 1 hex for each flag rolled. But if the unit is being attached to a leader, if they have also 2 units supporting, so next to this unit, they can ignore a flag and so they do not have to retreat. If they still occupy the same hex which were occupied at the battle's start, they can counterattack after suffering their casualties. They will also roll a certain number of dice and then they can apply those hits to their counterpart. After resolving all the attacks, the turn of a player ends. He draws 1 additional card and his opponent plays exactly the same way, his or her own turn. We play in such a way up until one of the players manages to acquire the required number of banners described in each scenario. Now there are some other elements, for instance, governing the possibility of retiring and reforming by cavalry attacked by infantry units. Some additional rules governing escaping and retreating leaders, some others governing, for instance, how exactly squares work, when we can come out of square, etc. But rather than explaining all those rules, I would prefer now to give you my thoughts about this game. I would like to underline its strong points and also tell a few words about what I think are the weaker points of Commands and Colors Napoleonics. So let's pass to the conclusion. Commands and Colors Napoleonics is a game that I have played really a lot during the past 10 years. I have played all the battles from the core edition, I have played several ones from the expansions, and I really had fun with this title. So, as you might expect, this will be a positive feedback, a positive review about this title, but as always, trying to be as much objective as I can, I will give you also my negative thoughts about this game. Starting though by the positive ones, I'd like to underline that this game is just beautiful. It is very pretty to look at. Now, the elements, when you are done with placing all the terrain features on the board, all the blocks which are placed on their initial places, you get the real feeling of looking at a Napoleonic battlefield. The blocks are very appealing. The graphics placed on the stickers then applied on the blocks are pretty, are functional. I really like the this aspect of the game when I can observe both the initial setup of the game, then how the game evolves, so how the units move, how they attack, how they retreat. You really have this feeling of observing a battle because of these three-dimensional components which you are using during the game. The blocks, even without the fog of war aspect, make it much appealing, make it much evocative, and I like it a lot. The second thing, which I believe is one of the strongest points of Commands and Colors Napoleonics and of the Commands and Colors system overall, is its simplicity. It is a game, it is a system which is very easy to learn, which is very easy to teach, which is at the same time also full of small details which not increase the difficulty of the system a lot, but at the same time grant you some additional things that you can do during gameplay and that try to simulate the era in which the game is set. So Commands and Colors Ancients will work differently than Commands and Colors Napoleonics because of those reasons. Commands and Colors Napoleonics will work differently than, for instance, Commands and Colors Medieval, which was published some time ago. So this is a very flexible system, but at the same time also still a very simple system. You can without any problems both learn the game by reading the rulebook, or teach the game or learn the game by looking even at how the game plays. What I think is also a very strong point is the dynamics and the flow of the game, because in some games where you have the I go you go system, you play your turn and you go for a walk, you go prepare a coffee, eat your dinner, waiting for your opponent to be done with his or her turn. Here, even though your actions during an opponent's turn won't be very complex, they still can occur. So you will sometimes be responding to opponent's cavalry charging towards your infantry, deciding to go in square. Sometimes you will hold the first strike card and you will surprise your opponent by playing it during his attack. Sometimes when his infantry will approach your cavalry, you will retire and reform. So still during your opponent's turn, you will be present, you will be part of the game. And even if not, the turns are quite quick. Move, shoot, give the initiative to your opponent and play so on until someone wins. So it's fast, it's dynamic, it's fun, because you do not think for an eternity, for 10 minutes what to do. You won't be counting hundreds of things. What you will be counting probably is how far you can move, with what number of dice you will be attacking, or how many dice your opponent will have during his turn if he attacks. And that's pretty it. What I really like is also the fact that you receive really a huge amount of very different battles in this core game. You get to play battles fought in the Iberian Peninsula. You get to fight also battles set in Belgium, because you can fight the Quatre Bras or Waterloo battles. So quite a big diversity with very different settings, because you'll have pitched battles, you'll have also some battles where one of the sides will be well not fortified, but it will occupy a very good defensive position, and your opponent will be trying to outflank you or prepare a massive attack. So those situations will be quite different, with also a great diversity of units, because you'll get not only light infantry, you'll get line infantry, you'll get grenadier, you'll get elite units as the young or old guard from the French perspective. You'll get the rifle light infantry, which is extremely powerful from the British point of view. And at the same time, the British, the Portuguese and the French armies all work differently. You'll get a different number of blocks for the same formations. You'll get different die bonuses. For instance, the French will get a bonus die while fighting enemy infantry. The British will get an additional die when shooting at when making fire attacks. So each army will work differently, and it will be a different feeling playing both sides. What I like also is the fact that this is a system which begs to be further expanded. You get a lot of additional expansions because during those 10 years the Spanish army, the Prussian army, Austrian, Russian army were published. You get the marshals and tacticians, you get also the epic battles expansion, but there is still a lot of room to expand this system. You can imagine, for instance, a Polish army from the times of the Warsaw Duchy. You get also, for instance, the possibility to publish a northern forces expansion with, for instance, the Swedish army, or you can concentrate on the minor German powers or on the Italian powers. A lot of things can still be added. Unfortunately, the game is somewhat placed on hold because of Richard Bock's commitments. He's, I believe, more focused on the newer titles in the Commands and Colors series, for instance, Commands and Colors Medieval, than in expanding Commands and Colors Napoleonics. But still, having said that, I believe that this game is still full of additional options, and I'd love to see those expansions published one day. What I really like is the fact that the battles are not only dynamical, not only the flow of the game is good, you really feel this epic aspect of the battle. You are really there, you're making decisions, you're moving forces, you're launching attacks, you're taking hits, you're gaining advantage, then you're retreating, etc. So this game can change from turn to turn. You might feel that you're on the offensive, but your opponent is holding a powerful card and he's pushing your attack back, and now you have to defend. So the game will be very intense, and I like this feeling a lot. What I really like is also the fact that this game, as I said earlier, is not only a copy of Commands and Colors Ancients. You still get some chrome in this game, which really can make you tell that this is a Napoleonics game, not only by looking at the blocks, at the uniforms, but when you see those squares against cavalry, or the combined attacks made by artillery and infantry, you instantly think of the 19th century. And this is good because the rules are not very complicated. You do not receive a lot of them neither, but they increase this feeling of this Napoleonic era aspect, and I like it a lot. So what I think are the weaker points of this title? I said that when looking at the game board with all the elements set, it is a very pretty battlefield. So you might think that I'm really very positive about the elements. Well, about their if I were to judge those elements based only on how they look, I would say yes, absolutely, they are great. But unfortunately, there are a few issues concerning quality. First of all, the game map, although mounted, in my opinion, is too thin. It is not the same quality of mounted map boards as in other games. Mine was damaged when I tried to replace it, to put it inside the box, and I had to glue it. The terrain tiles are extremely thin, and I believe that they should be of a different quality. The same applies to the player aid, to the player aids which are added to the base game. They are not very helpful. In the first expansion published, the Spanish Army, you get a two-sided player aid with absolutely everything that you need to play, which has absolutely every information about all the units which can be present in the game. And this is what I am using now. I am not using the player aids which were added in the base game because I find them very difficult to use. They have a lot of information which is crystal clear and doesn't need to be put on a player aid, or they are presented on 4 pages instead of 1 table. I don't like them at all. A major issue which can be a problem for some gamers will be the randomness. Because Commands and Colors Napoleonics has a lot of random elements. The first one obviously will be the die rolls. You get to dice a lot in this game, and sometimes you will be frustrated by the results. You'll be rolling 6 dice and obtaining no hits. Your opponent will be rolling 2 and killing 2 of your last men. This happens, and this might be frustrating, especially at times when you really put an effort into preparing an attack, into preparing the good cards which will be needed to push forward, and then the bad die rolls will influence the outcome. It is sometimes sad, it is sometimes the thing that decides of the outcome of the battle. The same applies to cards, because you will be drawing cards, and sometimes you'll, for instance, be holding 4 cards enabling you to move or to act on your left flank, whereas all the action is currently set on the right flank. Your opponent is launching a massive counterattack. You are seeing those soldiers approaching, but still you cannot react due to bad card draws, and you'll be drawing dead for 3 or 5 turns, during which your opponent will be gaining momentum and will be exterminating your units one after another. When speaking of exterminating units, this game sometimes becomes very abstract, because you will focus not on the battle itself, you'll be starting to focus on killing lonely blocks placed somewhere in enemy lines, because this is all about gaining banners, and banners are acquired by destroying totally a unit. So if you see a lone block standing somewhere in range, you'll be trying to kill it. It doesn't matter if at the same time you'll get a counterattack by your opponent, or if you'll be putting your units in danger, or if you'll be losing the momentum elsewhere. You'll be concentrating on gaining banners. You'll be trying to eliminate this unit. So this game tends to be gamey instead of simulate a battle. At the beginning you won't be feeling this a lot, but when the number of units reduced to 1 or 2 blocks increases, you'll be focusing mainly on killing those units and not on winning the battle, which would be a situation in which you'll, for instance, manage to outflank your opponent, or maybe push them from the defensive line that they occupy. You'll rather concentrate on gaining banners. So yes, it happens. Yes, sometimes it will be a thing that will create a feeling of playing a game which is not very tied to the historical way how battles were fought. So this is something that will bother extremely some grognards who like games which are which in their opinion are mainly to simulate in an accurate way how battles were fought. Having said that, Commands and Colors Napoleonics is still a great game, a game which I ranked number 1 in the list of my 10 introductory war games, a game which is a game full of dynamic, a game which has a great replay value, a game which is very pretty to look at, and a game that for people who are searching for something rather easy and also something that can be used as a tool to introduce new players to wargaming, well, Commands and Colors Napoleonics is definitely a game which can be used as such a tool. A game in which randomness plays its part, but it's also at the same time such a pleasant game, such an easy game, that it won't be a great problem. Commands and Colors Napoleonics is still one of my favorite games, and I'm definitely keeping it. I am looking forward my next play. 10 years ago I started playing this game. Look at this, how time goes by quickly. Very quickly, too quickly. This was the review of Commands and Colors Napoleonics, the core game from GMT Games. I wish you a fantastic day. I hope that you will revisit our channel in some time. See you next time.